Every civilization leaves a trace. A broken wall, a fading inscription, a scatter of ruins beneath shifting soil. Behind each trace lies a story of ambition, struggle, and slow unraveling. We search for order in these endings. We want history to move in circles, to obey a rhythm we can chart or predict, a neat pattern that explains why worlds collapse. But the past does not repeat in cycles, and no single pattern explains the fall of every kingdom. Some civilizations stretched themselves too far, others fractured from within. Some were undone by forces beyond their borders, others by forces beneath their feet. There is no universal script for collapse, but there are themes, 4 of them, reappearing across continents and centuries, shaped by choices, pressures, and human complexity. If we study those themes, the end of a civilization becomes not a mystery, but a mirror. This is Critical Scrolls, and these are the patterns of collapse. When historians talk about collapse, they don't mean annihilation. They mean something more specific and more measurable. A rapid loss of complexity. Complexity is what makes a civilization recognizable. A central government, social hierarchy, specialized work, long-distance trade, and the ability to build and maintain large projects. When a society collapses, these systems contract. Administration fragments. Elite structures break down. Cities shrink. Infrastructures are abandoned. The state can no longer coordinate the flow of information, labor, and resources. But collapse isn't the same as destruction. Many cultures survive their political collapses. Traditions, languages, and belief systems continue. Some communities even thrive after the central state dissolves. Archaeologists point out that total endings are rare. What usually collapses is not a people, but the political and economic structure that held them together. Why does this happen? Not because of a single force, and not because civilizations follow a predetermined lifespan. Researchers identify many pressures: environmental strain, climate shifts, resource shortages, elite competition, political fragmentation, economic mismanagement, and external threats. What matters is how these stresses converge, and whether a society's institutions can respond. Collapse is not inevitable, and it's not predictable, but it does follow patterns, and those patterns tell us far more than any simple cycle ever could. Some collapses begin at the edges, where an empire grows beyond what its institutions can support. Rome offers the starkest precedent. At its height, the Roman Empire spanned from Britain to the Middle East, a world-spanning system of roads, garrisons, governors, and tax collectors. Holding this enormous territory together required constant resources. Soldiers on distant frontiers, ships guarding supply lines, administrators coordinating a vast network of cities and provinces. As Rome expanded, the cost of maintaining this complexity grew faster than the empire's ability to pay for it. Taxes rose, local economies strained, and wealthy landowners found ways to shield their wealth from imperial reach. Meanwhile, frontier armies were strained to the breaking point, and internal rebellions demanded attention from soldiers already overextended. But fiscal pressure was only part of the story. The deeper problem was political fragmentation. From the 3rd century onward, generals repeatedly turned their armies against one another in civil wars, each claiming the imperial throne. These conflicts drained the treasury, eroded trust, and weakened defenses along the border. Loyalty shifted away from the state and toward ambitious regional commanders. As the imperial core weakened, local powers stepped into the vacuum. Roman generals, provincial elites, and federated groups began acting as rulers in their own right. They negotiated treaties, issued laws, and raised armies, often while still claiming to serve Rome. In reality, the empire had become a patchwork of semi-independent regions, each following its own logic. By the mid-5th century, the Western Empire existed in name more than in fact. When the last Western emperor was deposed in 476, it marked the end of imperial administration, not the end of Roman civilization. Roman law, religion, language, and identity endured, but the political system that sustained the empire had long since fragmented beyond repair. This is the first pattern of collapse. When a state grows too large, too costly, and too internally divided, its complexity unravels. Some civilizations do not collapse at their borders. They collapse at the center. The Abbasid Caliphate began as one of the most sophisticated states of its age, an empire of scholars, poets, engineers, and administrators. But that sophistication came with a cost. As the bureaucracy expanded, so did the number of elites competing to control it. Powerful viziers, secretaries, and palace factions gained influence over appointments and taxation, gradually eclipsing the caliphs they were meant to serve. Rivalries inside the court turned the government into a series of competing networks rather than a unified state. Maintaining this administrative system and the professional armies that supported it placed enormous strain on the treasury. To balance internal factions, later caliphs increasingly relied on Turkic slave soldiers, the ghilman, whose commanders soon became political kingmakers. Their interventions destabilized the court, igniting civil conflicts and weakening the state's ability to govern. As the court became paralyzed by infighting, provincial governors asserted independence. Many turned their offices into hereditary dynasties, keeping local revenues and raising their own armies. Across Iran, Central Asia, North Africa, and Egypt, regional powers emerged that acknowledged the caliph merely as a spiritual figurehead, not a ruler. By the 10th century, the Abbasid Caliph remained a respected religious figure, but real authority had dispersed across a patchwork of provincial states. This is the second collapse pattern. when elites multiply faster than the institutions that manage them, the state fractures, not with a single fall, but through gradual decentralization. Some collapses occur when internal weakness meets external opportunity. In the early 17th century, China faced a sudden fiscal shock. The Ming tax system relied on silver, but global trade disruptions caused a severe shortage. As the value of silver rose, peasants saw their tax burdens multiply. Landlords evaded assessments, inequality widened, and the state struggled to fund its armies and relief efforts. At the same time, governance fractured. Emperors withdrew from active rule, powerful eunuchs manipulated appointments and revenues, and reform-minded officials were purged. The bureaucracy became paralyzed just as crises intensified. Then came environmental disaster. The 17th century marked one of the coldest phases of the Little Ice Age. Droughts, crop failures, and epidemics devastated northern China. Grain prices soared, famine spread, and the government lacked the funds and administrative capacity to respond. Desperation turned to rebellion. Li Zicheng's forces, fueled by unpaid soldiers and starving communities, swept across the north and entered Beijing in 1644. By then, the Ming state was already a ghost of its former self. Only after this internal breakdown did the Manchus intervene. Their armies were disciplined and unified, but they succeeded because Ming institutions had already been hollowed out by years of fiscal exhaustion, factionalism, and environmental catastrophe. This is the third collapse pattern. An external conqueror merely pushes a crumbling door, taking credit for a collapse that happened from within. Not all civilizations collapse through conquest or political intrigue. Some collapse happens when the systems that support them become too strained to sustain the world built upon them. The classic Maya world reached extraordinary heights, towering pyramids, vibrant cities, intricate calendars, and complex networks of power. But beginning in the late 8th century, many of the great cities of the southern lowlands began to fade. Climate instability played a major role. Repeated multi-year droughts reduced crop yields and strained water supplies, turning manageable stresses into systemic vulnerabilities. Environmental degradation compounded the problem. Centuries of farming, deforestation, and massive building projects had altered local ecosystems. Soil thinned, forests receded, and water systems became harder to maintain. The landscape that supported the classic Maya was reaching its limits. At the same time, political demands grew. Rulers invested heavily in monumental architecture and elaborate rituals to display power, requiring ever more labor and tribute. Intercity rivalries intensified, and in some regions, warfare became more destructive. population growth and rising complexity strained the system further. As kingdoms expanded, rulers delegated authority to lesser nobles, creating political structures that were harder to coordinate. When droughts reduced the need for centralized water storage and warfare declined in some regions, many farmers simply left the cities. Rural life offered autonomy and stability at a time when urban life demanded more than it could provide. The Maya collapse was not a single event. It was a slow reorganization, a shift from overextended urban kingdoms to smaller, more sustainable communities. This is the fourth pattern of collapse. When ecological limits and social demands rise together, complexity becomes a burden rather than a strength. When we place these stories side by side, a single truth becomes clear. Civilizations do not collapse in the same way. There is no rigid formula. Rome shows what happens when political systems grow larger than they can sustain. The Abbasids reveal how elite competition can hollow out a state from within. The Ming demonstrate how internal weakness invites external conquest. And the Maya illustrate how ecological strain and complexity can outpace the land that supports them. 4 civilizations, 4 different ways that complexity can fail. Collapse is rarely a singular event. It's a loss of the structures that hold societies together, sometimes at the borders, sometimes at the center, sometimes through environmental limits, and sometimes through many pressures converging at once. These patterns don't predict the future, but they sharpen our understanding of how societies respond to stress, and how different pressures shape different outcomes. Looking at these patterns, it's tempting to draw direct parallels to the present. But the modern world is not Rome, or the Abbasid Caliphate, or the Ming Dynasty. Our societies are shaped by different technologies, different institutions, and different forms of resilience. And yet, the pressures we see in history are not entirely foreign to us. Large, complex systems still face strains in economics, in governance, in the environment, and in the ways societies respond to internal and external shocks. But modern states have tools that ancient civilizations never had: scientific knowledge, global communication networks, rapid disaster relief, international trade, and the ability to monitor and respond to crises in real time. Collapse today tends to be partial. Financial crashes, institutional failures, regional conflicts, not the total dissolution of entire civilizations. History does not provide forecasts, but it can illuminate the pressures that shape large, complex systems. It shows how societies succeed when they adapt to new pressures, and how they falter when institutions become rigid, overextended, or unresponsive. Recognizing these patterns gives us clearer eyes to understand the forces shaping the world around us, and how our responses to them might matter in the long run. Civilizations do not leave behind a single lesson. They leave threads of how people built their worlds, and how those worlds changed. Thank you for joining me on this scroll. If you'd like to be here when we open the next one, exploring how power, inequality, and human decisions shape the course of history, consider subscribing to the channel. This is Critical Scrolls. Until next time.